Okay, so hello everyone. It is a pleasure for me to have the participation of these experts and talk about entrepreneurship, investment, and innovation. Those who know me well know that I am always surprised by the amount of innovative ideas that arise every day. However, we have seen that not all of these incredible ideas manage to materialize, become a startup, and be successful in this business world. The objective here is to understand why this happens. What are the aspects that influence the success or failure of startups in these three iconic places of innovation? Israel as the startup nation, Berlin as the heart of Europe for entrepreneurship, Silicon Valley as the home of the greatest success stories, and also we will see how we are in Colombia. What policies does the government develop to support entrepreneurs and help them to consolidate? I will proceed to introduce you to our experts. So let's go from east to west. No, from west to east. We have here Cynthia Carrillo. She is an innovation ecosystem builder with an extensive experience guiding founders during their startup's highest period of growth. She has more than 12 years of experience in economic development, and having spent the last 5 in California, Cynthia has worked with entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders across both the public and private sectors. Most of her clients are startups from Silicon Valley or San Francisco, and she also works with many founders coming into the market from overseas. Now we have Francisco. Francisco Noguera is the manager of connection and experiences from Impulsa Colombia. He has dedicated his career to understanding and promoting the role of entrepreneurship and private business in solving social and environmental challenges. He has held different relevant positions in the field of entrepreneurship, sustainability, and social innovation. And before Impulsa, he was linked to Ecopetrol as manager of social prosperity. He was director of the Social Innovation Laboratory, and he is the founder of Futuros Posibles, a platform for developing podcasts that explore social issues. We also have Faye Freyschmidt. She will say how is her last name. I don't know how to pronounce it. But Faye supports companies from the media and creative industries, as well as digital enterprises who are looking to locate in Berlin and to grow there. She and her colleagues provide information on funding programs, offer advice on the right locations, or the search of qualified employees, and forge links to collaboration to partners in the scientific communities internationally as well. And finally, we have Ere Science, who had extensive experience from the Israeli government promoting the Israeli ecosystem in China, Colombia, Belgium, among others. His position as commercial attaché of the Israeli embassy allowed him to support business in fintech, smart cities, agriculture, homeland security, and health, to mention a few. And right now he's implementing an ambitious innovation project in Miami, and we are pleased to welcome him and all of our panelists. Just for you to understand a little bit the logistics here, you can ask questions. You can put them in the chat box, and I will moderate the whole conversation. So yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything before we start. Guys, Eres, Francisco.
Daniela, thank you for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning and to connect and be able to have a conversation with Faye in Germany, with Cynthia, Eres, with this incredible group. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I echo that. Very excited to be here. Thank you to Fintech Colombia for organizing, to the panelists, and thank you everyone who attended.
I'm also very happy to be part of this. I think it's a very, very nice mixture of different regions, different countries, but you know, common goal or common look at entrepreneurship. So very much looking forward to the conversation today.
Me
Yes,
too.
thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Daniela and Fintech Colombia. And as Faye said, this is really interesting, an international mix to hear different aspects and different ideas. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Okay, so let's begin. Let's start with you, Eris. Why do you think Israel is known as the startup nation? Can you give us some facts? How many startups are founded each year? How many of them fail? How many exits? A few facts.
Okay. Well, Israel was labeled Startup Nation actually by a book that was written in 2009. Two American journalists made a very interesting analysis of the Israeli economy and the tech economy that it produced, and labeled it the Startup Nation. So why is that? So if we look at facts and figures, Israel today is the per capita is #1 in the world for startups. Well, basically, in terms of Colombia, we have the population of Bogota. And for each 1,400 people, we have a tech startup. Today, we are talking about of over 1,400 startups that are founded every year. This year actually has been more than usual. We have, let's say, in any given day, we're talking about 6,500 startups that we refer to as startups that have made it or are continuing and did not fail. Because you asked me what is the fail rate in Israel. So a recent study came out that says we have around 45% of the startups that do not make it, unfortunately. However, in Israel, we consider a failure as an experience, a very valuable experience that will allow those entrepreneurs that failed once to learn, and the second time and the third time, they will do better. So thankfully, that has produced a culture in Israel that brought us to today, that we have 10 years, no, more than 10 years after the book was written, we can talk about 42 tech unicorns that the ecosystem has produced. We have, this year, we have over $15 billion worth of exits of tech companies. Startups have raised over $8 billion this year from 40 different countries. So the ecosystem is really quite impressive on a global scale. And it stems really because a lot of people have tried to imitate and also write books about what is the secret sauce of the Israeli startup nation. And it basically stems from one main thing. For Israel, it's either innovate or be eliminated. That's at least the feeling that we have. We're a small country surrounded by a neighborhood that is not very friendly. We do not, still recently, had any natural resources. And for us, it starts to be that. So the drive to innovate is a big one. It stems from culture, stems from the situation, stems from our history. And today we can really say that something is going well. And we push the idea of convergence of technology, because today there is not really one sector that we can say it's only AI, it's only fintech. Everything today has something of the other sector in it, and that's something that we find to be our strength. And in numbers, it shows. And because of that, over 350 multinationals, be it Google, Samsung, Microsoft, all these guys have decided to open an R&D center in Israel. So it's not only startups that we have, it's international recognition. And a lot of our innovation actually is funneled through these centers. And the spillover, of course, is amazing for the ecosystem.
Amazing, thank you. Actually, this mindset regarding the failure is very interesting. Francisco, do you think that we have that mindset here in Colombia?
I think, Daniela, that we are incorporating more and more of an entrepreneurial mentality, but I think there is a lot that we can do to further a culture that tolerates and sees failure as part of the entrepreneurial process. I agree with Erez in terms of the impressiveness of the achievements of the Israeli ecosystem and how it has positioned itself. And I think that dialogues like this are critical for us to really contrast what is going on here at home in Colombia and in other places around the world, especially if Colombia has an aspiration, as we do as a country, to position ourselves as an entrepreneurial nation. So to be very concrete in this first question, I think that we can continue to do efforts in terms of culture and mentality regarding failure and regarding those cultural aspects that relate to entrepreneurship.
Okay, cool. Cynthia, same question for you. How many startups succeed in Silicon Valley every year? How many of them fail? How do you see the landscape there in this sense?
Yeah, and I'd like to start piggybacking on what we just heard, especially in the concept of what is seen as failure, right? As a Latin American myself, I'm a Mexican national. I agree that that part of the world needs to kind of understand that just because a company doesn't last forever doesn't mean that it failed. And just because a founder exited multiple companies, that doesn't mean that they're not making it. Actually, in Silicon Valley, it's quite the contrary. It'll be quite common to come across an individual that has created multiple ventures, and each one has a stint of 1 to 3 years maybe, and they would be called a seasoned entrepreneur. They would be called a serial founder. Actually, venture capitalists would probably be more interested in speaking to them if they've done it over and over, because the degree of failure or success here is so split. It's very similar to Israel. It's 50-50. And the amount of founders that get funneled into actual venture capital are the cream of the crop. It's a very, very small amount. And it doesn't have to do with the founder being better or worse or the company not being good. It's just that the how you have to navigate that and how you have to be able to get the connections to get into a meeting while you're building the product and while you're burning through your money usually funnels them out of that process. And what happens most is that in the valley of death fundraising stage, that it's when you lost most of your initial funding, you no longer have friends or family supporting you, you're bootstrapping most of it, you don't have your angel funding coming in yet, or you finished it because you had to hire your first formal engineer. They usually run out of capital at that moment. And because the landscape is so competitive and everything moves so fast, they sometimes have to dissolve that, keep the idea, turn to do something else. So that's really what you see happening here in the Silicon Valley. There's a lot of churn. It's also the largest concentration of venture capital in the world. So it attracts most of founders from all over the world. There are a large amount of universities with very renowned technology programs. You have UC Berkeley here, you have UCSF, you have Stanford here. And all of these university programs also have entrepreneurship innovation programs. So there's more production than there is room to fund, regardless of the fact that all of this funding is concentrated here. So I think that that has to do with the odds of making it past the first 3 or 5 years. The average life of a venture, I would say here, is 1 to 3 years. But then once they make it past the 5-year mark, you could usually see that company making it in the long run.
Okay, understand. So basically you're saying, in other words, that what makes Silicon Valley so attractive to founders is because they, like the VCs are already there, so it attracts even more and more founders every year. So that's why it's an innovation place. Also with the Stanford and all the innovation programs, it makes like the perfect place to gather all these entrepreneurs, right?
Yes, and it's turned into, over the years, it's turned into a very friendly, very welcoming community for entrepreneurs, for founders. You will come and find that there are 10, 20 open to the public startup events that you can go to, that there are mock pitch sessions with actual venture capitalists that will take time out of their evening to judge you, tell you what you're doing wrong, that most demo days, if they're not open the day of the public, will be digitally distributed later, that a lot of people want to mentor startups, that it's very pay it forward in regards to knowledge. So that also impacts it. The fact that there's a huge community here. So yes, it's very competitive. Founders have to be head down. It's grueling to have a startup, but in front of you and right next to you and behind you, there's someone doing the same thing. So it definitely.
I see something interesting that just came to my mind, and it's like the difference between you and Berlin. Silicon Valley and in general San Francisco and this whole area of California is really expensive. Like living costs are really high. It's not the same, for example, with Berlin, right, Faye? It's really, I understand that Berlin is like the cheapest city to live in Europe. I don't know if I'm wrong, but why do you think that affects? Because Silicon Valley, I think, is like the dream for every founder to be there, but how does this affect to consolidate this ecosystem, you know?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fact and something that triggers young people coming to Berlin. I mean, it used to be our city marketing sentence that Berlin is very cheap but very attractive. It's not anymore, which is a good thing, I think, because it also gets a little bit more expensive over here, but compared to other big cities like London, Paris, and of course Silicon Valley, yeah, it's probably really, really, really cheap to live here and to work here. And I think it lowers the barrier to come here as a young person, young entrepreneur to start off, because it takes not a lot to start off. You can, I mean, most startups, they don't need a big office right from the start. So they start either working from home or in a co-working space. Both is quite cheap. The rent is quite cheap. Co-working spaces are fine when you look at their prices. So you don't have to invest a huge amount of money to start off. There's also a couple of legal forms for companies where you can start off with limited liability for only €1 as share capital in the beginning. So that makes it more easier. It doesn't have this big risk attached to it as it may have in more expensive areas.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so fine, around 500 startups are founded in Berlin every year, right? How many of them receive funding from the government, and how many are founded by VCs, for example?
It's actually 500 tech startups that are founded every year.
Okay.
It's a bit more when you look at the total number. I think last year was around 680 startups that have been founded, which still is very low in numbers compared to the huge numbers Aris was just giving us from Tel Aviv. But it also shows that that the proportion of tech startups is really, really high here, or really big in Berlin. And when you look at their funding structure, you can see that I think around 70% use external investment or external capital. And the biggest proportion there is capital from business angels. It's around 40% that win business angels for their startups. 30% are able to convince VCs. And yeah, and I think when you look at the public funding opportunities, there are different programs that we have over here. So they range from promotional bank loans that are specifically for the needs of startups. So you don't need a lot of security and you have very low interest rates. Those are given out by the big state investment banks that we have here. But we also have grant programs that are, of course, very popular because you don't have to repay those grants. You can use them for starting off, for paying your own salary, for innovation projects as well. And there are also publicly subsidized equity programs where, again, those public investment banks would either top up the investment sum that a startup gets from a private investor, or where the private investor gets a certain share of his or her investment back from the state development banks. So there's a mixture of various different programs here, and I think it has been last year 41% of startups that have been able to get those public funding programs, and that was quite a good number because there was also a study asking startups which kind of funding they prefer, and I think it was 48% that wanted to get state funding and 41 that got it. So that's a really good turnout.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It is. How is it in Israel? Does the government give some aids to startups to progress, or how does it work?
Yes. An ex-president of the US, Ronald Reagan, used to say that the 10 scariest words in English for the private sector is "we are from the government and we're here to help." In Hebrew, when you ask that, Israelis have this tendency to ask for a lot of things. So the Israeli government tried that sentence 20 years ago, and they got a list. And surprisingly, the government decided, let's go for it, because the government understood one key truth, that the government is the only body that can lose money on short term. And that led to the following. Today, Israel invests over 4.4 for its GDP in R&D, which means that our innovation agency has a lot of money to burn. Why burn? Because the idea is that we need to inject as much money as possible where the private sector cannot, where VCs cannot afford to do that. So we go to the pre-seed. So today we have over 18 programs, which basically say the following. If you're an entrepreneur with a good idea, and you can pass a committee that says your idea is viable, we will give you $80,000 for 12 months with the condition that if you succeed and you start selling, you will pay back that $80,000 by paying 3% of your sales annually till you pay it off. If you didn't succeed and you're a failure, that becomes a gift. So you don't need to pay it back. It started with that, and today, as I said, there are 18 different programs which the government tries to funnel startups to either a geographical area in the country that does not have enough development. Topics, for example, if we want to focus on biotech, on blockchain, things like that. So we invest in certain accelerators that offer that help for startups. So in general, the government is very, very much involved. One of the main things that the government also does and did was it started to become called the lunch theory. The idea is, if we get an engineer, let's say an entrepreneur, a technician, a finance guy, and just someone from the street, and we'll sit them down for lunch and they'll talk about a problem, good things might come out of it. And many of our companies have been founded by doing just that. Roundtables. Nowadays, it's cool to call them hackathons and others, but this is something that the government does in a very planned way and intentionally, to try and create as many encounters as possible between people with ideas, and to take it from the idea stage to a practical stage. So both giving the space and also the money to do so. So yeah, that's where the government.
Interesting. So basically, on your first idea, for the like half of the startups that fail is lost money, but the other half that succeed represents the money that the government is allowed to I don't know, to receive, you know? So it means way more than the money that they lose, right?
Today, the Israeli government has calculated that every dollar that it invests in research and innovation, it receives back, the Israeli economy receives back $15. So the idea is that as government, we can see it in a larger picture. We can have taxes, employment, and all that creates a very big benefit for the economy. So the government is a body that is able to absorb that, which private sector has difficulty to do.
Well, okay, cool. Okay, let's continue. Francisco, what is the innovation landscape here in Colombia?
So, no, Daniela, this is really interesting, and the insights that that Faye and Dennis were just giving me a good segue into this question. I think we recently passed an entrepreneurship bill, a legislation bill, to kind of continue to close some gaps and create a better environment for entrepreneurship and innovation in Colombia. And that bill covers a lot of what we have talked about. First, there are still very big financing gaps for startups and for companies in early stages in various sectors. So this bill really establishes, first, as and taking on the example that Eres was giving us, the possibility to establish regional seed funds for early stage companies in regions of Colombia that are not necessarily the hotspots of innovation, the big cities like Bogota or Medellin or Cali, but other regions where financing for entrepreneurship is more scarce. So the creation of regional funds is one aspect that we're tackling. Also, working with the Colombian Stock Exchange and with Fintech companies that you know well, we're opening up the space for crowdfunding and for many different people to be able to invest in startups, small amounts of money, open rounds of financing for the early stages of entrepreneurial ventures, and that has had impressive success. There are some companies that in recent months have reported closing financing rounds in a matter of minutes or hours with the help of the technological infrastructure of the stock exchange. So financing is one aspect that is still a burden in Colombia, and the government is also promoting through Impulsa and through regional innovation agencies grants and specific calls for proposals to provide early stage funding to companies as well. But financing is not everything. We believe that a more connected ecosystem is critical for entrepreneurial ventures to be able to succeed, and that connection has two views or two interpretations. One is geographical. I think we're opening up spaces where the entrepreneurial ecosystem can work together in many different regions across the country. We're opening a network of innovation hubs called Semprende, already present in 14 cities, with an aspiration to be in all the regions of Colombia by the end of this year. But it also has a more of a relational implication. There is a strong push here in Colombia for open innovation, for large corporations to adopt an open innovation mindset and open and present their innovation challenges to the startup community. So for example, Ecopetrol, which is the largest company in Colombia, it's an energy conglomerate, has launched a very ambitious program to present 100 innovation challenges to the startup community. And there are already 10 innovation challenges in, and a lot of lessons are being learned in terms of how to link the purchasing capacity and the innovation challenges that corporations have with the solutions that the startup ecosystem is able to provide. But not only corporations are doing that, but also the government. There is a big push to promote a GovTech ecosystem. So how can we connect the digital innovation space with the digital transformation needs of the government, both at the central level and also at the regional level? That is a community that is really growing fast. Lastly, I would mention what we are trying to tackle in terms of not only the quantity of startups, but also the focus on the sectoral focus, and how can we create more specialized ecosystems, if you will. And of course, the organization that you work for, that is hosting us today, Colombia Fintech, is one great example of that. I think Fintech has really become an example of how an industry can work together in overcoming some of the regulation challenges, creating regulation sandboxes to create a better environment for startups to operate in one sector, such as financial sector. We can see the same happening in sectors such as education, edtech, or agriculture and technology. That is a big opportunity for Colombia. So how can we create sector ecosystems that overcome some of the regulation hurdles that are present, create financing mechanisms that are better suited for that sector, create not only local but international connections with those ecosystems that are more advanced. So those are some of the initiatives that we are working towards, and that kind of touch on some of the points that my colleagues in the panel have mentioned in the previous answers.
Amazing, thank you very much. So do you think that Colombia is in a good path comparing us to our region, like the countries in our region?
I think definitely Colombia is positioning in itself as the place to think about entrepreneurship in the region. We like to call ourselves an entrepreneurial nation and have an aspiration to become, as Cynthia calls it, sort of the Silicon Valley in Latin America. That is the long-term aspiration of Colombia. And definitely, I think that the steps we're taking in terms of what I just mentioned is giving us an opportunity to go from a broad aspiration to a concrete one in ecosystems and in sectors where we see greater opportunity for Colombian entrepreneurs and for international entrepreneurs that may see Colombia as a destination where they can start and also implement their businesses.
Okay, nice. We in Colombia Fintech, we're trying to be like the first destiny for investors to see like the fintech hub we have here. But exactly. I don't know how is it in other industries, but I think we are also in a good path right now.
Exactly. And just to follow on that comment, really what you have done in terms of creating this very visible fintech space, bringing together the entrepreneurs and the investors that are working in that sector, that is a good practice that we would like to see replicated in other sectors, and we're happy to continue that conversation from Impulsa.
Well, thanks. Okay, let's go to a different topic. talent acquisition. Cynthia, it is known that migratory policy in the US is very tight. How do you do in Silicon Valley, or how do Silicon Valley companies get the talent they lack?
This is such a relevant question because it's actually a key issue that the tech industry, all of Silicon Valley, but the tech industry in particular, followed very closely all of 2020. I think we all know that the past administration put in a very strict executive order that actually halted any kind of immigration process for H-1B visas in particular, but in general, any foreign person coming to work from continuing until they knew what to do with the pandemic. Immigrant jobs create a domino effect for American jobs, especially if those immigrant jobs are in large tech companies that then employ others nationwide. So the Silicon Valley has always been one of the most welcoming regions for this kind of talent, but also out of sheer necessity. There have been studies done, and this study is updated every year, and they updated it this last year in the wake of that executive order. And they show that even if Silicon Valley recruited every single software engineer in all of the United States, they would still be short on the kind of talent and amount of talent that they need. So the tech community is always lobbying in Washington. They're always talking to the government to make an appeal for this. The private sector has been very bullish, very strong, especially the venture capital firms and the accelerators of going overseas into key areas where they need talent and having a presence. So B Capital just announced about 2 months ago, for example, that they're expanding their venture fund into China. And they were already present in Southeast Asia. 500 Startups creates accelerator programs all over the world, Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America. So these kinds of outposts actually help the Silicon Valley ecosystem stay connected with talent, and probably in challenging moments like the one that we just had to overcome this past year, be able to still hire that talent or invest in that talent while it has to remain overseas, while still having a connection to the ecosystem over here. Recently, the Biden administration has announced that they will roll back those restrictions on visas, which I think is an amazing, it's very good. It's a very good news for a lot of people who want to come here and work in technology. But also when it comes down to founders, looking for an E kind of visa, an entrepreneurship visa, is something very doable. It's a long process, but a lot of venture capital firms have access to their law firms on speed dial, and they can help you through it. There's a particular firm that I really like called Unshackled Ventures, and they have a very, very particular model. It's very oriented specifically towards immigrant founders. And they look at seed stage companies really early that are working on cutting edge technologies, but they look for at least one foreign-born co-founder. And part of what the fund does, once they give them that funding, is actually help them get their immigration status in order so that they can operate here. There's also a lot of resources through universities, UC Berkeley, UCSF, Stanford. They have some of the largest immigrant populations in the country for students. And they start involving these students in R&D exchange programs, innovation programs, startup spin-off programs while they're still studying, which makes it also a lot easier to have those 3 to 4 years to be able to actually develop that technology with the university. And if you have to have a hiatus while you go back home and get your immigration in order, you already have an agreement and you're still working on your technology. So I think that over the years, the entire ecosystem, the government sector, the universities, the venture capital firms, and communities of founders themselves have found ways to just be on the pulse of immigration and actually find ways to react to anything they have to react. But there's also all of these processes that we kind of already know, all the hoops that we got to jump to, said from an immigrant who's now on her green card herself. So it's just about surrounding yourself with the right advisors and following policy every single day and staying diligent while you work on your venture.
Really cool. Actually, I didn't know that, to be honest. What I do know is that, for example, in Israel, is really crazy the way they train kids, like really little kids, to be software developers. I understand there's even a company specialized in that, teaching kids how to program. I don't know if that happens in Colombia. I don't know if that happens in Berlin. You tell me.
Well, in Colombia, on the education issue, we do see an opportunity to incorporate more of an entrepreneurial mindset in education processes, from early education all the way to higher education, and to create more bridges between what happens in education spaces and the entrepreneurial spaces. And in terms of, I think, the gaps that we have to close in terms of digital skills is tremendous. The government is making an effort to train 100,000 new software developers by the end of next year. That effort is not focused on early stages of education, as you were mentioning. Some edtech ventures are tackling that issue, but I think those bridges between what happens and how we think about education and how we think long-term about the entrepreneurial, let's say, goals that we have as countries is a very interesting discussion in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Faye? How do you do it in Berlin? How do you get your talent?
Yeah, so within Germany, we have the very nice situation that we have the largest pool of IT talent compared to other German cities. Of course, when you look especially to Eastern Europe, for example, there's way more tech talent there with great here. So it's still, like, there's still room for improvement. There's still a lot to do. We don't see examples like you just gave us for children who already learn to code, but what we see is that it's a like pretty common pathway in your career right now that people start learning it later on. So they might study something and start their career in marketing, for example, or sales jobs. And then later on, they go to, we have different private schools who offer courses in software development, coding, but also like tech sales, for example. So the sales and using online channels for your sales job, for example. So people do that at a later stage, mostly part-time, or quit their jobs, do that, and then start a new career. We see that quite often. Yeah, but I think in general, as I said, we have so many, like such a big proportion of digital startups. When you look at the overall number of startups, that we still, like, it still is an issue and will be an issue to find the right talent for those startups and those jobs.
I understand. And like one different thing, if a Colombian company or American company would like to settle in Berlin, you as Berlin partner help it, like getting there, getting talent, getting the office, getting the best location, right?
Yeah.
That's the role in there.
Yes, so we have different service packages, and also when Cynthia was talking about American firms, US companies opening, for example, a branch office abroad in Europe, that's something that we have quite often. So we have a whole team working on, we call it the business immigration service, so supporting founders, entrepreneurs with their visa, with their residence permit. There are different ways how to tackle it. For example, some companies from abroad, they choose to first send a representative over to work remotely from Berlin for the foreign company, then maybe open a branch office, and then at some point open a real German legal entity. So there are different phases that you can use for expansion to Berlin. And yeah, we try to support and give advice what are the best next steps in terms of workload and also costs, for example. But apart from this topic with the support for visa issues, for example, we also try to help finding the right location in Berlin to live and to work, and also finding the right talent, as we were talking about tech talent. It's also a big issue, like where to find them, where to post your job adverts, for example. And then also funding. That's the last service, or the third service offer we have. Giving
That's
support.
the most important one. Okay. This will be like a question for everybody. I have heard that in some places, local governments allow startups to test their products. So for example, if there are startups developing a new technology in smart cities, the local government allows them to do some tryouts in that place to help them improve. Is that something that happens in Israel? Is that something that happens in Berlin, Colombia? Could you give us an example?
I can start, if that's okay. So the Silicon Valley was actually funded by government at a time. All of the R&D and all of the legacy that has built the ecosystem that we see today came down to two major government R&D labs, Lawrence Livermore and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and then extended to a semiconductor industry for defense. And then that extended to the early developments of AI and everything that now has created a consumer market. So the R&D public-private collaboration mindset here is extremely second nature. The city of San Francisco has an Office of Civic Innovation, and they actually scout GovTech companies year round, and then they showcase every year, and they actually find funding from different sources for these entrepreneurs. The city of San Jose has an innovation department as well, and they have recently created an innovation zone in 6 districts of the city where they're going to be able to test mobility, transportation technology, software for connected cities and smart cities technology, and they can work directly with the entrepreneurs. There is a US Patent Office right in downtown San Jose. So that's also a very good resource to have right there for entrepreneurs to do anything they need to do with IP. Oakland has a Startups Network initiative, and the Capor Center by Capor Capital was founded in Oakland specifically to look for startups that are having a social or civic impact. And they work with cities to be able to have those pilots. Universities, UCSF and QB3 for biotech and life sciences. There's a program called the I-Corp that works at a federal level, but they work very closely with the UC system. And they actually bring in startups at biotech and healthcare at the very early stage and help them through the entire customer development process. And this is free of charge, as long as you can show that you have a venture that will take off and that the R&D matches with the interest for the university. Stanford has a Tomcat Center for the environment. So that's also a very strong one. And then there's organizations like the Silicon Valley Organization, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, that are always looking to the policy side, the nonprofit side, and that intersection with the private sector. So that's also a really good resource. Prospect Silicon Valley is very focused in transportation, works with the California Energy Commission at the state level. The EV and AV, autonomous vehicle, electric vehicle landscape right now is going to explode for that kind.
I was going to ask you that. Is it true that, for example, you go to San Francisco and you ask for an Uber and an autonomous car arrive, like 100% autonomous car arrive, and you can get in? Is it true?
I have I've heard about that, but I have not had the experience of boarding a car firsthand. But I can tell you, I see one in my commute at least once a month. So they are at least testing them, and there's already real life scenarios on the street for all of this technology. And this is something that venture capital firms find extremely attractive. If a startup can get in front of a VC and they can say, I'm already working with a city or a transit agency, that gives a lot of value and a lot of credibility. And founders should be very aware of this and think of how economic development organizations and city departments can help them achieve this. When we were just listening now about all of that wonderful help that Berlin partners give to startups, I think many early stage startups don't get close to government because they think it might take too long, or they think that they're just not ready, or that they're gonna owe something. Talk to all of your country representatives that are in the market you want to go into. They usually know what they're doing, and they're helping 10 other people while they're helping you with a hand on their hip. We economic developments are here to help you. So the economic development departments in each city in the Bay Area that you're interested in going to, go into their websites, look at their programs, give them a call, do your research, and then try to find a way to pilot your technology before you come into the market. Would be something so big.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. Is that something that happened in Israel? Like, you have some places where you can test the new technologies before going to the market completely?
Well, if you would ask an Israeli entrepreneur, he would say that Israel is the startup nation, but not implementation nation, because the amount of startups that we have, we are unable to give the space to everyone, and government, to be honest, is not as fast and quick to implement as the startups pop up. Having said that, Israel does have a very wide testing grounds in certain sectors: cybersecurity, water tech, definitely anything to do with security, for sure. But if you talk about smart city, autonomous car, for example, is a good example, because while we have one of the biggest centers in the world for autonomous driving, for us to implement autonomous driving, we are still far away. We all think that terrorists will hijack that and kill us all. So, to your question, yes, we have, not the amount that we would like, but yes, there is very much use of tech and by government and local governments.
Faye, do you have that in Berlin?
Yeah, I think it's quite similar to what Eris just said. So the government is definitely pushing this, like having more test beds, more facilities to try out new concepts and new products. But they are still not, I don't know if I can say not fast enough, but there's usually the problem that they don't have enough capacities in the public authorities to manage those kind of projects, test projects. But there's one really good example. It's called City Lab Berlin. So this is also a public institution, and it's just for designing and implementing projects for the digitization of Berlin. So all sorts of areas, smart city, but others as well. So this is like one of the positive examples, but we would definitely need more than this. But the good thing is that corporates step in with their innovation labs and innovation hubs they have in Berlin. And then also the accelerators and incubators we have. I think there are like 300 different ones in Berlin. So there is like a great infrastructure of those players offering facilities, expertise to really try and test new concepts and new products.
Okay, thank you. Francisco, do you think we have that at some level?
Of course, I think we are moving in that direction. For those listening here in Colombia, there is an initiative here at Impulsa, the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Agency called MILAB. And MILAB is a public innovation laboratory that is aiming to map the solutions and the startups that have solutions that may be relevant to some verticals of government and public challenges. So right now they are conducting that mapping to really understand what are the gaps and what kind of support these public-oriented startups need to close. But also at the city level, there are some promising efforts going on. For example, the city of Bogota is funding with the aid of Bloomberg Philanthropies and other international actors, a public innovation lab. Medellin has really led the way with Ruta N in terms of bridging public challenges with the capacities of entrepreneurs. So of course there is a long way to go, but I think we are really seeing that those collaborations between the public sector and the private sector are not only beneficial for solving those challenges, but to nurture, as Cynthia was saying, those collaborations are critical to further build the ecosystem and to fuel it with the resources and the activity it needs to keep developing.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we run out of time. I could stay here and talking a lot about this with you, but I get these people so many things to do. We have a question in the chat box, so that will be the last one. If you have more questions, I can just give you their contacts, or we can meet in another opportunity. So Juan Romero asks the following: for a non-technologically innovative driven economy as Colombian, what can be, from your perspective, the first milestones to be achieved in order to promote entrepreneurship and innovation, having into consideration that we still linked into traditional sectors? Sorry. Francisco.
I think definitely we have to keep a broader view from an institution like Impulsa, take into consideration the different stages of development and not only focus on tech entrepreneurship or tech innovation. And I think one way we are doing that is through promoting these regional funds that have specific vocations and investment thesis and target sectors that are not all of them are focusing necessarily or exclusively on technology startups. And I also think that in promoting that collaboration, in creating a more connected community around the concept of open innovation, and bringing companies from the Colombian business community that are able to work not exclusively on technology, as Juan is suggesting in his question, but on other areas and on other challenges. That is one way in which those milestones can be achieved, and that capacity and that collaborative mindset can be built upon. Those are some initial ideas, but I'm conscious of the time and would love to hear the thoughts of the panel as well on this interesting question.
I'd like to just, Francisco, add that I think that those are great steps to take. I think that it's important to note, I agree with you, innovation it happens in traditional sectors too. And many of the current cutting edge technologies, like Fintech, comes from an extremely traditional sector, which is banking. Many of the largest problems that we're gonna have to fix at a global level in the coming years, greenhouse gas emissions, renewables, how are we going to feed the world and feed it every time better? It comes from traditional sectors. So I think that there's many ways to innovate, and from working in different ecosystems in Arizona, in the Sacramento region, in the Silicon Valley, in Mexico, I've seen that creating verticals and funding for each vertical attracts a lot of very diverse entrepreneurs. And I think it's the right way to go. And I'm impressed with how far Colombia has come. Just wanted to put that out there.
I could also add that Berlin also has very, very traditional industries, and like the service industry is very big here. So we know that problem or that situation as well. And what we see here is really a lot of corporations that what we always hear from startups, that it's quite easy to cooperate with corporates over here to get the access to corporates. And this is a really good win-win situation. We have those big, well-established, experienced corporates, but what they lack is the spirit of young entrepreneurs who can bring innovation into those traditional corporates. And I think this is also a step that we should encourage.
I would say each innovation ecosystem has its own path. Colombia has its own. As you can see, there's a number of examples in this session that each one has gone its path, and there's no right or wrong. I would just say dare to innovate and think globally. Just look at the people around in this session. Each one has dared and tried and connected to other ecosystems in the world to learn. Just do that. Just dare, go innovate. Find your own path, but don't accept the situation as it is, and don't give up because it's difficult. It's difficult for everyone.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And definitely thank you all of you for being here with us today. It's a great pleasure for us as Colombia Fintech to have you discussing this topic. I know this wasn't about fintech at all, but the idea for us is to understand what makes you so interesting for startups to arrive there, you know? So as I mentioned, we are trying to become the innovation fintech hub in the region. So we are trying to understand what can make us get to that goal. So all of your ideas were very, very interesting, and I hope that Francisco as well can implement some of them as best practices. So again, thank you very much, all of you, for being here and participating in this, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Daniela.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. What a pleasure to share this panel with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Daniela, buenísimo.
Francisco, gracias. Espérate, voy a detener esto.